Joining me today is Christina Adams, author of Chasing Shadows. When renowned professor Dr. Aidan Ryan vanishes without explanation, he leaves behind a haunting message revealing he has a new life and can never return. His devastated daughter Sofia embarks on a global search to uncover the truth behind her father's disappearance. What she finds is more shocking than she could have imagined, a web of family secrets and lies that challenge everything she thought she knew. After Clue's letter to Italy, Sophia reconnects with her estranged mother Ella, who reveals a hidden past of trauma and deceit. A.C. Adams is the nom de plume of co-authors Anthony Leigh Adams and Christina Adams, who have written, produced, and developed film and television products for many studios, including Disney, ABC, and CBS. Christina is also a producer of the Emmy Award-winning series The Amazing Race and multiple programs for Oprah Winfrey. Welcome to the show. Nice to have you on, Christina.
Lovely to be here. Thank you.
Good. I guess we were kind of chasing shadows mechanically in the beginning of the show, but
Yeah, just a
yeah,
few glitches.
just a few glitches, but we are here. Okay, Chasing Shadows. Now, the book itself, as I understand it, is also a reflection of your own experience in your own life, your own personal experience.
Well, actually, it was a true life mystery. My father did leave, and it turned out that he had a hidden life that no one in our family was aware of. So, after a years-long international search with my husband Anthony, we decided to write a novel about it.
So you just, yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you come to that kind of a decision? Because,
Well,
yeah,
I mean, when it first happened, it was obviously very difficult and emotional, and I didn't want to talk about it because to anyone, it was just, devastating. Um, but after we started, uncovering layers of deceit and lies and secrets, it just became more and more interesting. I mean, if my father was this very brilliant man. He spoke multiple languages. He was a professor at the University of San Diego here in San Diego. And I would go to his classes. I idolized him. I would sit and listen to him talk, and I thought he was the most brilliant man in the world, as most daughters think of their fathers. But when this happened, it was, the rug got pulled out from under us, and suddenly I had to face the fact that there was a lot I didn't know about my parents' past. And once I got over the emotional trauma of it all, I began to find out what the truth was. And I'm going to mute my phone because it's ringing from the. Um, so after researching, we decided that it was the only way I could figure it out to really tell the story, to tell the emotional truth of the story, was to, fictionalize it because there was many things I couldn't discover. My father was in a kind of secret society that we had no idea about. And once we interviewed a bunch of people from there, it was clear that we were never going to find out all of it. So whatever we couldn't discover, we decided to create. So we took liberal license to get to the heart of the story, the creative truth of the story, um, while still being inspired by all the things that we went through trying to find out the truth.
so your father's leading a double life, right? And you have
Correct.
no idea.
Right.
And I, is there a moment when you come, because, are there hints along the way?
Well,
Emotionals. Yeah, go ahead.
it's interesting you say that because, my parents got divorced when I was quite young, and and of course there was always tension in their family, in our family between my parents. But I thought it was just standard tension. In other words, I didn't think there was anything of it because so many children come from divorced families and there's tension between their parents, but it doesn't mean all the things that we discovered when he disappeared. This all only came to the light after he left. And so I guess I could have seen it if I had known it, but I never understood why. There was tension. I mean, as described in the book, my parents met and fell in love in Rome. And this was shortly after World War II. And my mother's home was bombed in Sicily, leading her family to flee to Rome, which at the time was considered a open city. Um, and my father left the priesthood. None of this I knew growing up. I found this out. So I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he was rejected by his family, and when my parents' marriage fell apart, I never understood why, other than the fact that they didn't get along. But however, once we figured out what was really going on, the depth of their deceptions, um, it pretty much all became clear, and I had actual compassion for both of them. And that was one of the reasons, other reasons we wanted to write the story.
You
Because
talk about compassion, that's difficult to do, as it seems to me, as you're describing the story, your story.
it is, but
Yeah.
at the same time, if you knew, I mean, he came from an Irish Catholic family. He was basically pushed into the position of being a priest by his parents, then rejected by his parents when he decided to marry my mother. And my parents emigrated to the United States from Italy after falling in love, and he had nobody. So when they pursued him and said, "No, you've left this very important group, and you need to come back," after discovering that, the church paid for their divorce, and I mean, there was all this stuff we didn't know as children. Um, None of my family knew. And my two older sisters were busy raising children. And I was in my 20s and I thought, I'm going to find out what happened, what the whole truth is. And slowly my mother revealed truths that I didn't know. Um, my father
I mean, were you
never revealed
resentful? I
any of
have to
it.
get back because, I mean, obviously you are resilient, um, and as you're describing it and the story and everything, it does point that out, your resilience. But what about the resentment or the anger towards both of them? I would assume for the not
Well,
telling.
that
Yeah,
that happened for sure. I was
yeah.
very angry and very resentful that they'd lied to us. And but without knowing without knowing the truth of someone's experience, life experience, you can be angry with someone on the surface because you don't understand what motivated them to do the kinds of acts they did. And I think that was the initial response. But as I started to discover the pressures my father was under, the pressures he experienced as a child, um, and then the pressures my mother was under, her guilt for marrying a priest, his guilt for leaving the priesthood, the layers of complexity of those people that I thought of as my parents, and they are my parents, but I started looking them as human beings, not just parents, if you know what I mean.
Well,
So
when you say that, I'm thinking you mentioned earlier that idolizing your father because he was brilliant, et cetera, and then kind of allowing yourself emotionally, I guess, to step down from that and say, okay, he's a
human being.
man besides my
Exactly.
father. Yeah.
Exactly. You put your parents, I think it's natural for most children to put their parents on a bit of a pedestal. And just because you do. And then when they disappoint your expectations, you you knock them down and you think they're horrible people. But then when you look at what the truths are of their life experience, it's easier to become compassionate when you understand what it is they've faced, and the kinds of traumas they've faced, the kinds of rejections they've faced. And then you start understanding them as human beings who suffered, and you start forgiving them. And it's a growth period for me. Writing the book was very cathartic for me because all of that stuff came out as we started researching their history and uncovering layers of lies. And I think a lot of people just lie and hide the truth, not because they're being evil or misleading. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to look at it in the face. I think looking at some unpleasant truths are hard for people. I think that's hard for any human being to do. And you'd rather just ignore it and pretend it didn't happen, which is what my parents did. And so they
Do you,
certainly weren't going to share that with their children.
and what about you in terms of, you talked about, you just said evolution, like you as an adult are also evolving and maybe able to take a look at yourself. I mean, with all you, I mean, we have to assume that all of us have certain secret stuff, vulnerabilities we don't want people to know about, and it gives you a better
Absolutely.
understanding of your parents as you age.
I agree, 100%. I think as that's the beauty of getting a little bit older, you get some perspective. Um, Younger people, their world is a little shrunken because they haven't had as much life experience. And so I think I've grown as a human being, hopefully. I try. I'm
Doing the best you can.
doing the best I
Yeah.
can. But yeah, I think it was easy once I knew some of their stories to forgive them for what they did. It was actually it was a process, but ultimately it was easy. And I think it's important for all of us human beings to look at other human beings and look at their flaws and look at their foibles and go, you know, I could have taken that same path had I felt insecure about my past. I mean, my mother's past was incredibly traumatic. Her home was bombed. Her family had to flee to Rome. I mean, when she met my father, I'm sure she felt like, he was her future, he was the life raft. And when he met her, he was probably in a situation where he was tired of being a priest. He had become a Monsignor, he'd risen in the hierarchy of the church, and he was stationed at the Vatican, and he met my mother, and it's like, whoa, I can finally be free from what my parents demanded from me, from what the church demands of me. And they basically left Italy hoping to start a new life. And all that got crashed when his parents rejected him and her. And so when I was growing up, I never knew anything about my father's family. He always hid that. Um, we would ask questions and he'd say, "Oh, I don't really have anything to do with them anymore." But we never knew why. And so there was a lot of hidden stuff that we had to uncover. Um, and I think it made it easier for me to have compassion for both of my parents when I finally knew what they had gone through.
When you say that, it makes me think of a lot of the stories that emerge from the Holocaust. Lots of secrets and lies and reinventing oneself and not wanting to talk about it in families, and the same, similar kinds of discoveries that you've been talking
Absolutely,
about. Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Because, when people experience trauma, it's very hard to look at it in the face and talk about it. I mean, when my father first left, I didn't want to talk about it. I know exactly how it feels. It's like didn't want anybody to know about it. It was horrible. It was just, it was this trauma, and you thought how embarrassing, and how can you share that with anybody? But as you mature, you go, okay, that is actually something that everybody experiences, not maybe to this extreme or to the extreme of someone who faced, the horrors of the Holocaust. But everybody experiences some trauma in their life where they go, oh gosh, I'm not going to face that. I'm not going to look at that in the eyes. And I felt like it was very inspiring, actually. It was hard, but it was very inspiring and it was liberating, to be quite honest.
And you did this obvious with someone else. You did this with your
With my
partner,
husband,
with
yeah.
your husband, right? And so, um, did that make it easier for you
I
to?
think it did
Yeah,
because
yeah.
when this first happened, I just met Anthony. I was in my early 20s and it was like devastating. And so it took a while. As I said, it wasn't like I immediately jumped on an airplane. Um, but we did go all around trying to figure out, interviewed multiple people. Um, and he was all in. I'm very fortunate. I have Anthony's been my writing partner and partner in life for decades. And most of the projects that we've written for television, we've written together. Um, We started out as musicians. We both wrote songs together. So he was like, "Okay, let's do this. Let's find out." And we weren't even thinking at the time about writing it as a story. We just wanted to know the truth. And then years later, after, research and kind of digesting it and being able to process it, I said the best way to tell the story is as a novel because it takes place it's from the point of view of the daughter searching for her father. It takes place from the point of view of the mother as well, and also from the father. So we dive into the backstory of the father and the mother so we can understand who they are today. It's all present day, but we use flashbacks to understand what made them who they are.
And
And
what
the lead character, Sophia, also learns how to forgive her parents through this experience.
Yeah, it's a story of, well, parental abandonment, which is your story.
Hmm.
Um, so let's talk about that because I think that unfortunately, as a social worker, that's one of the big issues that comes up in therapy for clients. So, in terms, because mother and father, as you're discussing, your father had this secret life, but then so did your mother. Both of them did, right? So that whole issue of abandonment, they're not who they say they are. They,
Yes. Um, I think the novel definitely delves into that. And um, I mean, I think that it's really important for people to realize who their parents are, even if they do have secrets. I mean, I, I think that life should be such that you question everything. That's my new mantra that I live by now.
that's
Be-
terrifying.
Because I think a lot of things on the surface seem like one thing, but if you actually delve deep, it's, I think you find out that there's a lot of hidden stuff that people don't want to share.
But
Um,
Christina, I have to get, what about trust though? I mean, do you sort of, anyone who's listening to the show, well, my parents now, what are their secrets? Do I really, do I really trust them? Do I need to be asking them, at the dinner table, questioning everything they say, or how do you
Well,
manage
it's
that? Yeah.
interesting because we just got a review from Kirkus,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things that they said, which I thought was fascinating. At the tail end of the review, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something like, "This is going to leave everyone questioning their own, history."
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that what happens with people, I mean, a lot of people are honest, obviously, and are open and willing to tell you everything about. But I think most families have some secrets. And I think that what I discovered and Anthony and I discovered as we were digging through this is even his parents, which were amazing parents, they had a few secrets too. And I think that whatever a person feels insecure about or feels traumatized by, they tend to just bury it. And I don't think it's healthy to bury any secrets. I ultimately think everything should be out in the open, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think it's
Yeah.
kind of important to not have secrets between people you love.
As a parent and of three grown children, I'm thinking about what you're saying. I have my own secrets and a couple things I never shared with them until I felt that they were old enough to hear it. So, that and didn't share what I had to say maybe when I felt they were too young or they wouldn't be able to handle it.
I think that's
And
a very
yeah,
important point. I mean,
yeah.
it's possible that my parents just didn't want to share that with us. Um, because they felt we wouldn't be able to handle it. I think that's part of it. It's the shame, it's the guilt, it's the worry that your children will judge you poorly. I think every parent thinks they need to be this shining example of perfection to their children. Unfortunately, I think most parents are not. They want to be, and on the surface they might be, but I think a lot of parents have issues that if they brought them out in the open and talked honestly with their children, it would be a benefit for both of them, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I'm not a psychologist.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion. Maybe
Yeah.
because of my experience. I don't know. I just think if my parents had told me what had happened, it would have been, I think, a little bit easier.
Yeah, and doesn't it depend on what the secrets are and how many they are and the impact it has, as your parents can see, the impact that it's having on your life. And of course, both parents they're different people too in terms
Right.
of what and how and when they want to share the information.
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah, and they don't always
Agreed.
want to agree. But I think, the book is great. I mean, I think the timing is great. I think there's a lot of this happening now today, and I'm not sure why, but people, parents, people revealing their secrets. Maybe it's the internet. We have more access to information. You can Google your parents and find out what they were doing 20,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. I think the themes of our book remain relevant
Yeah.
today, because human nature doesn't change. So history continually repeats the same patterns. Um, so I think it's kind of like those kinds of emotional things that all families go through are are endless cycles of repetition of the same experiences. It may not be as dramatic as what I went through, but I think everybody has secrets that I think, honestly, if they would share and be open with their children, I think their children would understand them better. And and I think there would be a more open and honest conversation about what they experienced and what they went through and what shaped them. I think our experiences shape us. And sometimes those experiences are hard to face, and sometimes they're not. And sometimes they're just trivial, and your parents might think, oh, that's something they shouldn't know about because it was embarrassing. I did this or that. But I think deep things need to be out in the open, shared with your loved ones. And I think everybody benefits by that sharing.
Yeah, I agree. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I think that's true. You end up connecting in a more honest way and getting
Hmm.
closer, even if
Hmm.
it's painful.
Hmm.
And yeah, working towards that, working towards the truth, I think always works out what is the best in the end. Um, anyway, so people have to read your book, Chasing Shadows, and I've been talking to the author, Christina Adams. Christina, give us websites, platforms to go to for more information about
Well,
what you're
um,
doing and the book.
absolutely. We have our own website, which is adamsentertainment.com. So anybody can visit that if they want to find out more about us and the book. And the book is being released this Friday, on ebook. The audiobook will be available in May. And it's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all, fine booksellers. So we hope you'll have a chance to read it. We we also, if you want to see a very detailed review, go to Kirkus Reviews and search for Chasing Shadows by A.C. Adams. And that one really, I think, hits the nail on the head, with exactly what the story is about. And I think it'll inspire people to read it. And on Kirkus also, you can click the where to purchase, and it'll take you to all the various websites where it's being sold.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
for
really
inviting
appreciate it.
me.
Thank you.
Take care.
Yeah. Joining me today is Tony Stewart, author of Carrying the Tiger, Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, and Finding Joy While Grieving. When Tony Stewart's wife, Lynn, receives a sudden and devastating diagnosis, they scramble to find effective treatment, navigate life-threatening setbacks, learn to live fully in the shadow of death, and ultimately to share the intimate grace of her final departure from this world. After Lynn's death, with the help of friends and old and new, Tony slowly climbs out of his shattering grief and surprisingly eases toward new love. Adapted from more than a decade of posts on caringbridge.org, they chronicled his odyssey both at Lynn's side and afterwards. He shares an honest, passionate, life-affirming tale about the full circle of life and death, one that offers a deeply intimate look at grief and its hopeful aftermath. He has made award-winning films for colleges and universities, written computer software that received rave reviews, designed a grants management application that was used by 3 of the 5 largest charities in the world. Welcome to the show, Tony. Nice to have you on.
Well, thank you very much, Kathryn. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here. And well, we want to hear your story. And for many people, this is the story, or this, a cancer diagnosis. I don't think there's I don't know anyone who hasn't had a cancer diagnosis themselves, someone in their family, friends. We're all affected, and
Yes.
we all, and we all respond differently. So let's start with that. Let's maybe start with the diagnosis when Lynn was first diagnosed.
So I remember the day vividly. It's where the book starts. It was September 28th, 2014. We had been married for almost 30 years at that point, and Lynn and her doctors had been chasing down various digestive issues, acid reflux, some diarrhea, things. She was losing weight, and no one could figure it out. They were scoping her from the waist down or from the belly button down. When one day she started to notice a tiny throb of pain in the middle of her back that grew over the next few months. And the doctors at first thought, that's just referred pain. Something's going on down below, but you're experiencing it up there. Until finally, she went for an MRI of her spine. And on Sunday afternoon, we were at home and the phone rang, and it was our beloved GP calling to tell her that she had tumors in her lung and her spine, which came as a total surprise to us. And they'd been looking in all the wrong places for the previous 6 months. This knot of pain was what clued us in, but by then it was already incurable, stage 4 non-smoker's lung cancer.
So what the reaction to that is, as you're describing it, I mean, misdiagnoses. You've been to all of, I don't know how many doctors or how many physicians, and they had misdiagnosed.
We were chasing down Lynn's symptoms, and so our GP was the generalist, and we'd had him for years. Terrific guy, lovely man, very smart doctor. And Lynn and I used to travel a lot. We had been to India, we had been to Southeast Asia, and every now and then you pick up like an amoeba or something. Not that it had happened to us, but it does happen to people where they're have digestive issues for years that are very hard to get rid of. And so everyone suspected that something like that had happened to Lynn. And since all the symptoms she was describing were basically from her belly button down, that's where he sent her to specialists where that's what they do. And it was only significantly later, after 3 or 4 months of going to these other doctors, that the knot of pain in her back became bad enough that she mentioned it to someone who said, it's probably nothing, but let's check that out. And that was actually the first true symptom, direct symptom of her cancer. Cancer messes with your whole system, or it certainly did for Lynn. So for as long as her cancer was not being treated, she had these digestive issues. But that's like a side effect. The real cancer was way up in her lungs and then in her spine.
So what would you say to people who maybe have a similar or are having a similar experience?
I would say, if you're having unexplained symptoms that may seem to be in some part of your body and no one can figure out what it is, ask your doctor to go wider. Ask your doctor, hey, could this be, say, cancer somewhere else that is spinning off some side effects? All it would have taken was a CT scan or even an X-ray, which hardly costs anything, of her lungs or of her upper body, and they would have seen this months earlier.
Okay, so they months earlier, and that's obviously a lot of time, and a lot happened to her, to her during that period of time when she wasn't being treated. Okay, you get the call, you hear the diagnosis. Lynn is the one who has the cancer. Um, did you have the same kind of response, the two of you?
We both were stunned, and that is exactly the word I use in the book. I could have written paragraphs, and instead I just said, I am stunned, because that's what it felt like. But then that night, as the news sank in, we started expressing our love for each other more than we had in our entire marriage. This was like a life-changing moment. This is when you discover that the life you thought you were going to have is not the life you're about to have. We didn't yet know that it was incurable. We just knew it's Sunday. The doctor is saying, you need to go to an oncologist right away. That's our GP telling us that. And we were scared to death, especially because we knew enough to realize that if the tumors are in two different places in your body, either you've got two kinds of cancer simultaneously, or your cancer has already metastasized. But we were desperate to believe that wasn't true and that there'd be some other explanation. So we didn't know, oh, this is a death sentence, but we knew that was a real possibility. And we had never been a particularly emotional couple. I mean, we called each other best friend, but we didn't celebrate Valentine's Day or do any of those sorts of things. And that night, 28 or 29 years into our marriage, we sat at the table telling each other out loud how much we loved each other, reminding each other of all the things we had done together, and how much we were going to miss this, and how much I would miss Lynn if she was gone, and crying. And it was a huge emotional change.
You wonder, or I'm wondering, I guess I should ask you the question, like, why do you think you wait so long for all? I mean, obviously you have this very powerful relationship, but you don't really, as you're describing, express it to one another. Do you have to wait until there is this? Does one have to wait until there's this huge, catastrophic crisis in their life to be able to do that?
Oh, goodness, no. I think this is just our personalities. I want to say that for us, we constantly told each other, you're my best friend. And that was huge. And we shared all these intimacies. I talked about my feelings with her in a way I didn't with anyone else in the world. We had an extremely tight relationship. It's just that for whatever quirk of our personalities, we weren't the sort of people who gave each other cards, flowers, birthday gifts. We really hardly ever even birthday gifts. We just lived with the knowledge that we had this beautiful, tight bond. But it suddenly became important that night to say it. And I think most other people would have said it many times before, but you might find yourself saying it again after getting a phone call like that.
So after getting that phone call, and then then and you had to, and I'm assuming that you followed the doctor's advice. Obviously, you found an oncologist.
Yes, he referred us. He referred us immediately to an oncologist. We called Monday morning. The oncologist didn't have an appointment till Wednesday, and I have to say, that sounds like nothing. And in hindsight, I would say, really, nothing happened in 2 days. Those were terrifying days. We just imagined those tumors exploding fast, which is not how it works at that stage. We went to the oncologist, and he looked at the report and said, before we can even treat first he said, you almost undoubtedly have lung cancer that has metastasized to your spine because this is such a common pattern. When I see an MRI report like yours, that is what happens. We'll do a biopsy, we'll find out, but I can tell you I'll be really surprised if it's something else. And then he said, but we can't treat the cancer right away because that spinal tumor is almost on your spinal cord, and if we let it keep growing, you're going to be paralyzed. We've got to deal with that tumor before we can treat your lung cancer. And suddenly, that same day, we were calling around to find a neurosurgeon. I mean, he was referring from his referral, who could see Lynn, and one of them had an opening that afternoon, and I just took the whole day off from work, and we jumped in a cab, and we ran over there, and just hours later, we were sitting in a neurosurgeon's office talking about whether Lynn should have surgery on her back to open up her whole back or intensive radiation, and which would be the better approach. And it's like, oh my God. I really felt like we tumbled down the rabbit hole, and the whole world was inside out, upside down, and we had no idea what was going to happen. It was scary as anything.
How do you make those decisions in the atmosphere or the context of like this diagnosis, this horrific diagnosis, and then you have to make these life decisions, both of you together.
Mhm.
How do you do that? You know what I mean? How did you do it, I guess? And making sure that I would assume that you're making, you want to make the right decision. And you're in this state of, I'm picturing, you're in this state of like devastating news.
Yes. And I would say in our case, we were very lucky that we started out with tremendous faith in our GP, the original doctor, and he was referring us to this oncologist who he said is an old friend, and they lunch together once a month. And we took that to heart because we really loved our doctor. And they're both associated with a good hospital in our neighborhood. So we start out with a certain amount of faith. I know other people who have not had that good luck and have started out with doctors who were cold, impersonal, and they didn't know where to turn. Ours were very warm and knowledgeable. But Lynn and I had different personalities. And my personality, the things you read in my bio, making movies, developing like an international standard. I can't remember if that's in the bio or not. I did these big projects in my life. My whole career has been full of big multi-year projects where you break it down into little pieces and then you do them step by step. And that's how I think. So from the very beginning, I'm breaking this all down into pieces and thinking, oh, maybe we'll do this next. And where are we going to go for a second opinion, which turned out to be very helpful that we did get a second opinion. And Lynn, who was a painter, an artist, was much more sort of emotional than me. I don't mean flying off the handle. Both of us actually, when faced with a crisis, were pretty calm. But I was doing all this research and second guessing our doctors and then thinking, that sounds right. And Lynn was just living in it and was terrified all the time because this was her cancer. And somehow we made a good pair doing that. So we followed the initial part of this journey. We knew we were with doctors who each came well recommended by the one before that we had trust in. And we followed that initial set of recommendations. And within 2 weeks, Lynn was in the basement of Mount Sinai Hospital having super intensive radiation on that one tumor. And we hadn't stopped to think for a second. It's just like, we need to kill this tumor now. And we'll worry about whether we made the right choice later or never. That's how it started.
And that's how it started. And so I don't, in the beginning, I think in the intro, I read about caringbridge.org, because your journey, that's what I guess your book is based on the blogs that you wrote, or the posts that you wrote on caringbridge.org.
Yes. And this is a huge part of the story. Carrying the Tiger would not exist as a public book for other people to read if we hadn't started out using caringbridge.org, which is sort of, for those who don't know, a little stripped down. It's a nonprofit organization, no ads, and it allows you to set up a little Facebook-like website that in our case only our friends could access. And we used it initially just because Lynn had a lot of friends, and in those first few days when she started firing off emails to tell people about that phone call, suddenly we were flooded with all these emails going back and forth, and you have to answer each one separately. And someone said, there's this CaringBridge thing. You could just post the information there, and all of your friends could read it in one place, and then we'll get back to you, or we'll write comments there. And that turned out to be a godsend. But Lynn asked me to write the posts. I wrote like 99% of the posts, and it went on for 8 or 10 years.
Why did she ask you? I have to get back to why did she ask you to write the posts? Well, I mean, as opposed to her doing it herself.
She felt that she was too emotionally involved and would have a hard time. She was a very good writer, but would have a hard time getting the words on the page. And this more, type A project personality of mine allowed me to just sit down and say, today we went to the doctor and this is the horrible news we heard and this is what the next steps might be, which is what those first posts were like. The other thing is, Lynn she wanted me to share what was going on. This is a choice that we made that we didn't even realize how important it was. And many people do not make this choice. But I hope that if you read the book, you'll see how this played out for us in fantastically positive ways. She wanted me to share what was going on Caringbridge so that she could have conversations with her friends that were not about cancer. This is an interesting paradox. Because I was sharing with our friends in writing almost every night, because in those early days, things happened like every day, what was going on, when Lynn saw her friends and had conversations with them, she knew and they knew the cancer part of the story. So they could say, how's it going with this painting? Or what did you do yesterday? And not spend the whole conversation on her cancer, so that she was able to still live as much of the life she had had before as possible, while also sharing the information. And then we got tremendous support from our friends through Caringbridge. It's fantastic to get those comments back saying, we're with you. And also more interesting, like suggestions and advice from people who'd been down that part of the road before. It all turned out to be terrific.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lynn sounds like a really wise woman. I mean, because I think one of the things when you're diagnosed with cancer, many friends kind of step back and are afraid to even talk to you about it. So as you said, or she said too, it gives you an opening. It takes away that discomfort because
Yes.
you've given them the information, and that does happen a lot. People just are too afraid and too scared and afraid of offending, or they just don't want to hear it. But this kind of takes that all away and puts it, so you can become more connected to everyone.
Yes, and this is what happened for me and for us. And the other side effect, which led to the book, is that over the so twists and turns very quickly. We followed up on second opinion that led to a clinical trial, which led to some experimental drugs that were incredibly successful for Lynn. But I want to explain, when you have incurable cancer, incredibly successful means they got her tumors to stop growing. Unbelievably, 1 in a million successful would be remission. What these drugs did was they held down her tumors for 5 or 6 years. We had a lot of medical twists and turns because of her spine and the things that had gone wrong in her spine. And that's like the whole first part of my book is the twists and turns of dealing with the spinal issues. But the cancer was being held down. And I was writing posts through all of this. And my posts, I was increasingly open emotionally in the posts. So they started out being the way I said, so factual. And within a few months, with all this reader support, like our friends saying, like, we really enjoy reading this, I started revealing more of what it felt like. And I got more and more open emotionally in the posts, even though I hadn't been that kind of person in real life. A friend came up to me a year or two into this at a party and said, Tony, from reading your posts, I feel like I'm getting to know you in a way that I never did before. And we had known each other 25 years when he said that. But I got much more open. And as a result, we have like really interesting things to read in the book. It's not just a recitation of, oh, this happened and then that happened.
So at the end, I mean, Lynn got 6 more years.
Yes.
But talk to us about the end, sort of the end of life, and when you realize that maybe she is not going to live much longer, and how you're going to deal with that. I spoke to someone who said he felt like, when his wife died, that he had a part of his body amputated that was gone and gone forever.
So I would think of that as part 3 of the book, which is grief. To directly answer your question, leading up to the moment of her death, that's part 2 of the book, the dying with grace part. The cancer beat the drugs and the tumors started to grow, and that process played out over the 6th year. And at first, we absolutely did not think she was dying. We did various things, scrambled to find another treatment. It was very much like starting over in terms of treating the cancer. We'd gotten 6 years, but now the tumors were growing again, and those drugs were not stopping them. And the latter part of that year became really, really hard for both of us, and very hard for Lynn as her spine basically started to crumble in various ways, and life became very painful, physically painful, and she never wanted to take so many drugs that she would feel like a zombie. That was not interesting to her. She wanted to be fully alive and alert in her life, so she had to experience the pain. And eventually we reached a point where we came home from a horrible day, tremendous amounts of pain and bad news, and we got a phone call from the doctors saying now they had just read the MRI report from that morning, and now the tumors had gone into her brain. At this point, there were tumors. They had exploded out of her lungs by then. We want you to come back to the hospital first thing tomorrow morning to have radiation. And Lynn said, I can't go back to the hospital tomorrow. I need at least a few nights at home. And she and I started to have a conversation about should she go back to the hospital for a few more days of treatment, and I was trying to pull her into it. This despite the fact that by any objective measure, if you are ever going to do hospice, now was the time. But I, as her partner, wanted more time with her, even though she was more willing to stop. Then the phone rang. It was our oncologist, a different person than we had just talked to, who'd been with us for 7 years, who said, I'm looking at these reports, and I think you have to say, enough is enough. Maybe the time has come. And with his encouragement, which almost makes me want to cry every time I tell this, because it was the most beautiful thing, we decided to have home hospice. And Lynn stayed home. We were home. And it only took 2 weeks. And those were 2 of the most beautiful weeks of my life. So that's why I'm saying the amputation feeling came a little more than 2 weeks later, because the middle chapter of the book, which is called Traveling, is about my day-to-day experience of what it was like to be with Lynn as she was dying, as we both knew she was dying. And during the first 10 days of those 2 weeks, she was still able to talk to me. And we were having conversations. What does this all mean? What does this feel like? It was just amazing. And rather than being like a tragedy, I look at that as the natural end of her life. She did too. And a beautiful gift that I got to live it with her.
And the book, I think, is a beautiful gift for all of us. And we only have a couple minutes left, so I want to make sure that everyone, we didn't even get into the why carrying the tiger, but that's another, yeah.
I know we only have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah.
Read the book and you'll find out where the title came from.
Exactly. Read the book and you will find out what the title is. And the author is Tony Stewart. I've been talking to him, Carrying the Tiger, Living with Cancer, Dying with Grace, and Finding Joy While Grieving. So, yeah, Tony, give us a website, platforms to go to get more information about the book and about you.
Absolutely. My website is TonyStewartAuthor.com. And if you go there, you'll learn all kinds of things about Carrying the Tiger. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, several others, Substack, LinkedIn. And there are links to all of them in the header of my website, the little icons. If you want to follow me on Instagram, that's of all the socials, that's probably where I'm most active. There are also samples from the book. And the book is available now as in print, ebook, or audiobook. I read it myself. Technically, it releases next week, so if you order it today as we're having this conversation, it'll be a pre-order, but it's available everywhere, and you can ask for it at your bookstore too.
Great. Thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it, and I know my audience, your audience, did too. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I was happy to be here.